In 2012, a photo spread across the internet like wildfire. A man naked, eyes glazed, handcuffed. This wasn't just any criminal. This was the voice that had saved country music from extinction. The same man who'd filled stadiums, won 7 Grammys, and sent 22 songs to #1 was now a national punchline. But that wouldn't even be the worst part of the story. There's a moment when the fall seems complete. When public humiliation, arrests, and destructive headlines have already stolen everything: dignity, career, respect, and then something even worse happens. In July 2013, a stroke so devastating that doctors guaranteed he'd never walk again, never speak clearly again, and certainly never sing again. The voice that defined a generation was silenced in a single night. How does someone go from teenage jail cells to becoming the man who saved an entire musical genre? What happens when 22 #1 singles aren't enough to fill the emptiness inside? Why does an icon with everything to lose choose the path of self-destruction? And when doctors say there'll never be music again, that the story's over, how does a voiceless man find the strength to prove them wrong? But before we understand the brutal fall and the impossible recovery, we need to go back to the beginning. To a town so small it barely appeared on maps. To a boy who learned that love and pain arrive in the same fist. To the moment when a woman, 11 years older, saw something no one else could see. This is the story of Randy Travis, the pure voice that became legend, a legend that became scandal, and the miracle that happens when a man refuses to let silence be the final word. Randy Bruce. Braywick was born on May 4, 1959 in Marshville, North Carolina, a farming town where poverty wasn't just common. It was inherited. His parents, Harold and Bobby Traywick, raised 6 children in a house that trembled with tension. Harold worked construction when work existed, but his devotion to whiskey often outweighed his devotion to peace. Randy would later recall that when his father drank, the belt came off. Nights echoed with shouting and the crack of leather against skin. But amidst the chaos, there was music. Harold could play guitar. When he wasn't drunk or angry, he'd sit on the porch and pick melodies that seemed to float above the bugger. Poverty. Randy watched those fingers and felt something stir that didn't hurt. By age 8, he was teaching himself chords. By 10, he was performing at local talent shows, his voice carrying a gravity far beyond his ears. Music became his escape, but escape wasn't enough. By 12, Randy was running wild, skipping school, stealing cars, breaking into stores. By 14, he'd been arrested multiple times. By 16, he dropped out entirely. The local sheriff knew him by name. The judge threatened adult prison. He was headed toward a cell or a grave. Then, in 1975, at 16, he walked into a Charlotte nightclub called Country City, USA, owned by Lib Hatcher, 11 years his senior. When Randy opened his mouth and sang, she froze. That voice cut through smoke and noise like a prayer. She later admitted she knew in 30 seconds he was the real thing. But he was also broken and angry. Lib made a decision that would define both their lives. She became his manager, protector, and eventually his lover. It was scandalous from the start. She was married. He was a teenager, but she saw a star trapped in circumstances. For years, Randy lived in the back of the club, washing dishes, cooking, and performing nightly. Lib divorced her husband and poured everything into his dream. Rejections piled up: too traditional, too country, not commercial enough. In 1982, they sold the club, packed a U-Haul, and drove to Nashville with $5,000. Nashville chewed them up. Labels passed. Producers smirked. Industry favored pop country. Randy's baritone felt like a relic. 2 years, he worked odd jobs and played dive bars. Then producer Martha Sharp at Warner Brothers heard his demo and signed him to a development deal. His first single stalled. The label considered dropping him. But then 1982 climbed to #6. On the other hand, was re-released and soared to #1. In 1986, his debut album Storms of Life exploded, selling over 3 million copies and producing for #1 singles. It became the first debut country album ever to go platinum. Suddenly, Randy Travis stood on the Grand Ole Opry stage, making grown men cry with Forever and Ever Amen. Between 1987 and 1997, he reshaped country music. Album after album, hit after hit, he proved authenticity wasn't obsolete. Always and Forever conquered the charts. Old 8x10 followed. No Holdin' Back delivered more number ones. 7 consecutive platinum albums. 22 number one singles. 7 Grammy Awards. He opened doors for artists like Garth Brooks and Alan Jackson. But even at the peak, cracks formed. His relationship with Lib drew scrutiny. In 1991, they married after 16 years together. Nashville whispered about manipulation and control. Pressure mounted, touring relentlessly, chasing perfection. The drinking began quietly and grew louder. He swore he'd never become like his father, but the bottle found him. By the mid-1990s, country shifted toward younger, flashier stars. His albums underperformed. In 1997, he parted ways with Warner Brothers. New labels couldn't recreate the magic. But the fall wasn't sudden. It was a slow erosion, smaller venues, fewer hits, more drinking. His marriage fractured. In 2010, after 19 years, he and Lib separated. By 2012, arrests made headlines. In February, police found him intoxicated outside a Texas church. In August, he crashed his car and was found, naked and belligerent. The mugshot went viral. Late-night comedians mocked him. The man who once embodied dignity was now a cautionary tale. He later admitted he didn't recognize the man in that photo. The shame compounded his legal troubles. Continued. The divorce from Lib grew bitter. By mid-2013, he was alone, and he reconnected with Mary Davis, who encouraged sobriety and stability. For weeks he remained sober, talking about rebuilding something small and meaningful. On July 11, 2013, everything changed. He suffered a massive stroke triggered by congestive heart failure. Doctors warned that even if he survived, he'd likely never walk, speak clearly, or sing again. For days, he hovered between life and death. When he awoke, he couldn't move his right side. He couldn't speak. The damage was catastrophic. Rehabilitation was brutal. He relearned how to swallow, sit, stand, and eventually take a few trembling steps. Speech therapy reduced him to practicing basic sounds. The man who'd sung 22 number ones struggled to say his own name. Depression settled in, but Mary refused to give up. Slowly he improved. By 2014, he could walk short distances with a cane and speak in halting phrases. On March 21, 2015, he married Mary in a quiet ceremony at home, struggling through his vows, but standing tall. In 2016, he was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. Unable to deliver a full speech, he stood tearful as the crowd honored him. Later that year, at the Country Music Association Awards, he appeared during a tribute performance of Amazing Grace. As the final chorus approached, he stepped forward and sang a few fragile lines. The arena erupted. It wasn't perfect. It was defiant. A man told he'd never sing again had just sung. Today, Randy Travis lives quietly in Texas. He walks with a cane. He speaks in short, slurred sentences. The voice that once filled arenas is now a whisper. He can hum melodies, occasionally sing a line, but sustained singing remains beyond reach. Mary manages his care and protects his privacy. He attends rare public events, receiving standing ovations not just for his music but for his resilience. Financially secure through royalties and careful planning, he lives simply. His health remains fragile, managed by medication and constant monitoring. Asked what he wants to be remembered for, he answered through Mary that he tried, that he kept trying even when everything was gone. His story is no longer just about platinum albums or number one singles. It's about a boy from poverty who rose to greatness, fell spectacularly, and refused to stay down. The stroke didn't end his story, it transformed it. Every step with a cane is a verse, every slurred sentence a chorus. He may never sing again as he once did, but his life itself has become a song, one about survival, grace, and the stubborn refusal to let silence have the final word. In the years after that unforgettable moment on the CMA stage, Life did not suddenly become easy. There was no dramatic overnight restoration, no miraculous return to touring or recording sessions that stretched into the early morning hours. Recovery for Randy was never cinematic. It was repetitive, slow, often frustrating. The applause faded, but the therapy continued. The cameras left, but the exercises remained. Each morning still began with stretching stiff muscles, strengthening weakened limbs, practicing balance so he would not fall. Each afternoon often included speech work, repeating sounds, shaping syllables, coaxing clarity out of a tongue that no longer obeyed him the way it once had. There are days when progress feels visible, a clearer word, a steadier step, a longer walk without exhaustion. And then there are days when fatigue hits like a wall, when even familiar words refuse to form, when the effort of being understood feels heavier than silence. Stroke recovery is not a straight line. It is a jagged path of advances and setbacks. Randy learned to accept that reality the hard way. What makes his story remarkable now isn't a comeback album or a surprise tour. It's the discipline of endurance, the humility of accepting help, the willingness to be seen not as the invincible voice of a generation, but as a man navigating vulnerability in public. Fame once demanded perfection from him. Survival demands patience. He still receives letters. Fans write about weddings soundtracked by Forever and Ever, Amen. They write about funerals where 3 wooden crosses brought comfort. They write about how his music anchored them through divorce, illness, heartbreak. Mary often reads those letters aloud to him. Sometimes he smiles. Sometimes he closes his eyes and hums faintly along to memories only he can fully hear. The songs live on in other voices now: radio, streaming playlists, young artists covering classics. On stage, the voice may be quieter, but the echo is everywhere. There is something quietly poetic about the way his life unfolded. As a young man, he was told he was worthless. As a superstar, he was told he was irreplaceable. As a fallen celebrity, he was told he was finished. And after his stroke, he was told he would never sing again. Each time, the verdict seemed final. Each time, he defied it in his own way. He no longer measures success in chart positions. Success is a stable heartbeat at a cardiology appointment. Success is finishing a full sentence without losing the thread. Success is walking unassisted across a room. Success is waking up beside Mary and recognizing the gift of another day. The scale has changed, but the fight remains. When people speak of Randy Travis now, they often talk about legacy. They mention the 22 #1 hits, the Grammy Awards, the Hall of Fame induction. They talk about how he restored traditional country music at a time when it was drifting. All of that is true. But perhaps the more profound legacy is this: he showed that dignity can be rebuilt, that a man can fall publicly, fail painfully, and still find a path back to meaning. He once sang about amazing grace, the kind that saves a wretch like me. Years later, broken and fighting for words, he embodied the very message of that hymn. Grace not as a lyric, but as a lived experience. Grace in survival, grace in forgiveness, grace in second chances. On quiet evenings in Texas, when the sun dips low and the sky turns gold, Randy sometimes sits on the porch with Mary. The world beyond the ranch keeps moving: new artists, new trends, new headlines. But there is a stillness there that feels earned. He has lived multiple lifetimes in one body: troubled boy, revolutionary star, fallen idol, stroke survivor. Few people are forced to confront themselves so completely. Fewer still find the courage to keep going afterward. He may never reclaim the voice that once shook arenas, but he reclaimed something arguably more important: himself. Not the polished image, not the untouchable legend, but the flawed, resilient human being underneath it all. And maybe that is the final note of his story: not loud, not soaring, but steady. A reminder that even when the music fades, the meaning can remain. That even when the voice weakens, the message can grow stronger. That sometimes the greatest comeback isn't returning to the stage, but choosing to live fully, gratefully, stubbornly after the curtain was supposed to fall. There are moments now when visitors sit across from him and expect to see only tragedy. They see the cane, they hear the slowed, slurred speech, they notice the pauses between thoughts. What they don't immediately see is the strength it takes to sit there at all. The concentration required to follow a conversation, the determination. Behind every carefully formed word, survival has reshaped him, but it has not erased him. Sometimes he watches old footage of himself performing. A younger man in a crisp Western jacket, shoulders squared, voice pouring out like thunder wrapped in velvet. The crowd roaring, the confidence effortless. He studies that version of himself not with envy, but with a kind of quiet recognition. That was real. This is real too. Both are parts of the same story. One was built on talent and momentum. The other is built on endurance. There is a particular kind of courage in living after the applause stops, when identity has been tied to a gift, and that gift is suddenly limited. The question becomes unavoidable. Who am I without it? For Randy, the answer didn't arrive all at once. It formed slowly through hospital rooms and therapy sessions, through frustration and tears, through the steady presence of someone who refused to leave. He learned that he is not only the voice, he is the will that kept fighting when doctors prepared for the worst. He is the husband who struggled through vows because love mattered more than fluency. He is the man who stood on a stage and sang broken notes anyway, knowing they were imperfect but singing them regardless. That is a different kind of strength than chart-topping success. It is quieter, hard-earned. There are still hard days. Days when exhaustion steals what little clarity he has. Days when words feel trapped just beyond reach. Days when memories of the fall, the arrests, the headlines, the shame surface uninvited. But time has softened the sharpest edges of those memories. Regret remains, yet it no longer defines him. It exists as part of the landscape, not the entire view. Young artists sometimes reach out asking for advice. Through Mary, he tells them to guard their hearts, to remember that fame magnifies whatever already lives inside you. If there is peace, it grows. If there is pain, it grows too. He knows that better than most. Success did not silence his wounds. It amplified them. And when the noise of fame faded, those wounds demanded attention. There is something deeply human about the arc of his life. It refuses to stay neatly inspirational or neatly tragic. It is both, triumph and collapse, glory and disgrace, silence and song. That complexity is what makes it resonate. It mirrors the contradictions in all of us, the parts we celebrate and the parts we hide as the years move forward. The public sightings grow rarer. Health dictates the schedule now, not tour managers or record executives. Yet when he does appear at a ceremony, an awards tribute, a quiet church gathering, the response is always the same. People stand, not out of nostalgia alone, but out of respect. Respect for what he gave them in his prime. Respect for how he has carried himself since. He once revived a genre by reminding it of its roots. Now, in a different way, he reminds people of something even more fundamental: resilience. Ability to absorb devastation and still choose to live. The humility to accept help. The grace to forgive yourself when the world has already judged you. In the end, the story does not close with a final grand performance or a perfectly restored voice. It ever truly closes it all with a man sitting on a ranch in Texas, breathing steadily, watching the sky change colors at dusk. A man who lost almost everything that defined him publicly and discovered something steadier underneath. He cannot sing the way he once did, but he can still hum a melody.
Yes.
He cannot speak with the ease he once had, but he can still say thank you. He cannot command arenas, but he can command his own persistence. And perhaps that is the truest measure of a life. Not how high the voice once soared, but how firmly the spirit stands when the music fades.